3 years had passed since Lin Yue saved the Empress Dowager from certain death, a deed that should have earned her a place of honor and gratitude. But fate, cruel as it often is, had other plans. Lin Yue had spent those years recovering from wounds, both physical and emotional wounds that left her body frail, her spirit cautious, and her heart wary of those who called themselves family. The Marquis's mansion, once familiar and warm in her childhood memories, now felt like a cage filled with whispers, veiled glances, and the sharp scent of betrayal. When she finally returned, her eyes were immediately drawn to the figure in the grand hall. Lian Rong, her cousin, sat atop the marble staircase with the grace of a swan and the audacity of a ruler. Every motion of her slender fingers, every curve of her painted lips, seemed to proclaim ownership of the house, of the wealth, and most insidiously, of Lin Yue's life. Her presence radiated triumph, and the family's deferential bows only magnified the sense of alienation that gnawed at Lin Yue's chest. "You, her mother, Madame Lin," said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you're back. How recovered you look." Her voice was soft, but underneath lingered an edge that spoke of careful calculation, of patience spent waiting for Lin Yue's moment of weakness. Lin Yue's heart clenched. She had dreamed of this reunion as a triumphant return, but instead, she was greeted by cold politeness and the overwhelming presence of Lian Rong. Her brothers and sisters hovered around Lian Rong, laughing at her jokes, carrying her books, even insisting on adjusting the folds of her silk robe as if she were the rightful lady of the house. Every glance at Lin Yue seemed to carry silent judgment, a subtle accusation that she was the interloper in her own home. I am home," Lin Yue said, her voice quiet but firm. "I have returned after 3 long years. It is rightfully my place to stand here." She lifted her chin, forcing her gaze to meet each family member's in turn. She searched for some flicker of recognition, of loyalty, but found only polite indifference or worse, amusement. Lian Rong's eyes glinted, cool and calculating. She rose gracefully, descending the stairs in a fluid motion, the hem of her embroidered robe whispering against the polished floor. "Ah, little you," she said sweetly, the words dripping with poison. "You've been gone for so long. We almost forgot you existed. Don't worry, everything has remained orderly in your absence." Her smile was radiant, yet Lin Yue felt the chill of a blade hidden within it. Madame Lin's expression hardened imperceptibly, and Lin Yue's chest tightened. "Lian Rong," she said slowly, deliberately, "you've taken much from this house in my absence. The attention, the favor, even the position that is mine by birth. I have returned to claim what is rightfully mine." Her words, spoken with authority, echoed faintly against the high ceilings, but the response was nothing but stifled laughter and disbelieving looks. "You speak as if you've been wronged," Lian Rong replied, her voice soft, almost melodic, but carrying the unmistakable tone of mockery. "Mother says you've been unwell, haven't you? Surely your mind isn't playing tricks on you." She tilted her head, feigning concern, while the subtle smirk tugging at the corner of her lips betrayed the cruel amusement she found in Lin Yue's indignation. The room fell silent, but not for long. Madame Lin's smile returned, more predatory than before. "Yes, you," she said sweetly. "Perhaps you've been confused after your long recuperation. You must understand, things have changed. Lian Rong, she is a fine young lady, and she has taken care of this household in your absence. It is natural that we favor her." Her words were calm, precise, and lethal in their delivery. Every syllable was a carefully constructed brick in the wall that now separated Lin Yue from the life that had been hers. Lin Yue's heart sank. She had expected coldness, perhaps even resentment, but she had not expected outright dismissal, the erasure of her very identity. The sense of betrayal, deep and searing, rooted itself in her chest, and for the first time, the enormity of her isolation became painfully real. She could feel the walls closing in, each corridor and ornate archway of the mansion now a labyrinth designed to trap her in silence, obedience, and despair. "Mother," she said, her voice trembling but carrying the weight of desperation, "you cannot be serious. Lian Rong she is not my equal." She is, but her words died on her lips, suffocated by the cold, calculating stares of her siblings. It was as if her voice alone had become a betrayal, an anomaly that must be punished. Madame Lin's expression remained serene, yet the sudden movement toward Lin Yue was deliberate and terrifying in its calmness. You speak of things you do not understand. Perhaps, a period of quiet reflection would do you good." Her eyes darkened slightly, and with a subtle nod to the household attendants, Lin Yue realized too late that she had been declared insane. The guards moved swiftly, restraining her with gentle but firm hands, dragging her to the secluded wing of the mansion that she had once thought a sanctuary. Days turned into nights, nights into endless monotony, and Lin Yue's world shrank to the confines of her cell. Food was scarce, the walls damp and cold, and the echoes of laughter from the main house cut through her like knives. Each day she felt herself fading, not physically alone, but socially, spiritually erased. And yet, through the haze of hunger and despair, her mind remained sharp, her spirit unbroken, fueled by a burning need to reclaim what was hers. It was during this slow, relentless torment that the most devastating blow came. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight spilled weakly into the cell, Lin Yue appeared, her smile brighter than ever, a twisted mirror of innocence. Behind her, Madame Lin followed, the shadow of authority cloaked in cruelty. Lin Yue purred, her voice deceptively sweet. Do you understand now why you never truly belonged here? Do you see why everyone loves me more than you? She paused, leaning closer, and whispered something that shattered Lin Yue's world entirely. I am your mother's daughter too, only she does not call me illegitimate. We share the same blood, but not the same father. I have come for what is mine. Madame Lin's hand fell lightly upon Lin Yue's shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a curse than comfort. It was always meant to be this way, you. Your life, your future, everything you fought for, it was never yours. And now, it ends. Lin Yue's scream, raw and unfiltered, was swallowed by the stone walls. In that moment, she understood the full depth of her mother's betrayal, the cold logic of Lin Yue's ambition, and the cruel irony of her existence. The final moments blurred into a haze of pain, rage, and disbelief as the hands that had once nurtured her now extinguished her life. Fire consumed the room, the smell of burning wood and smoke merging with the final, bitter taste of betrayal. Lin Yue's eyes, wide with unspent fury, reflected the dancing flames as her life was stolen, her body erased, and her spirit cast into the void. The mansion outside remained oblivious, continuing its routines, while one life, one soul of unyielding courage and intelligence was obliterated by deceit. As the flames licked the corners of her cell, Lin Yue's spirit lifted from her body, unbroken despite the violence done to her. Her eyes, now ethereal and burning with the unquenched fire of vengeance, gazed out of the windows of the mansion. The world she had known had betrayed her completely, but even in death, Lin Yue knew one thing: this was not the end. Not yet. Her body may have been destroyed, her identity stolen, her family corrupted by greed, but somewhere, deep inside, her spirit vowed silently, the scales of justice would tip, and the hand that took everything from her would one day tremble before her wrath. The world of the living felt distant, muted, and unbearably sharp at the same time. Lin Yue's spirit hovered above the charred remains of her cell, unbound by flesh, free to move through walls and corridors. She had expected darkness, a void of nothingness, but instead, she found herself suspended in a liminal space, where every echo of grief and every whisper of betrayal was magnified 1,000-fold. Her senses, no longer limited by mortal constraints, picked up the tiniest details: the flicker of candlelight in the hall, the subtle clink of mourning jewelry, the tremor in voices as her family learned of her death. Her first sight was the grand hall, now filled with somber, gasping figures. The Empress Dowager, the very person Lin Yue had once saved, was seated in her gilded chair, pale and trembling. Her hands clutched at her chest as if the weight of the world threatened to crush her. When she fainted, Lin Yue felt a pang that was sharper than any blade. It wasn't fear or anger, it was grief. Grief at the helplessness of being a spectator to the pain of those she had tried to protect, and the realization that she could do nothing to comfort them in this form. Among the stunned crowd, Lin Yue noticed Prince Jian, the emperor's eldest son, standing rigidly by the dais. His jaw was tight, and his eyes burned with a mixture of shock and barely restrained fury. He had seen her die, or at least knew of her fate, and something in him had snapped. He turned toward the servants who had brought the news, his fists clenching as he swore under his breath. Lin Yue, though incorporeal, felt the intensity of his promise resonate through the air. I swear it, he murmured, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. The ones who did this, they will pay. Every last one of them. I will make them suffer. I will make them burn for what they took from you. Lin Yue's heart, or what remained of her human emotions, fluttered. There was an unfamiliar warmth in his words, a thread of hope she hadn't felt since her own death. This was a mortal ally, someone whose wrath could become her instrument, and yet, it was bittersweet. She could not step forward, could not speak, could not touch the world of the living. All she could do was watch. Her gaze swept over the family she had loved, or thought she had loved. Madame Lin, standing like a queen of ashes beside her daughter Lien Rong, showed no sign of regret. Instead, there was panic, fear, and a calculated panic that she tried to mask with forced composure. Her brothers, who had once tormented her relentlessly, now cowered, their faces pale with dread as whispers of their imminent doom reached their ears. Lien Rong, however, held her head high, her expression a mask of defiance. She had believed herself untouchable, invincible even. Lin Yue's spirit hovered closer, anger coiling within her, feeling the heat of injustice rise like a storm ready to break. How could she have been so naive, so trusting? How could she have thought that blood would protect her, that loyalty would shield her from ambition and deceit? The first retribution came swiftly, and Lin Yue felt the vibrations of terror ripple through her ethereal form. One by one, the family's sins were laid bare and punished, not by chance but by the careful, ruthless orchestration of Prince Jian. Lin Yue's mother was the first to fall, her face contorted in disbelief and fear as she was stripped of her status and wealth, her power evaporating like mist under the morning sun. Lien Rong's world began to crumble as well. The daughter who had stolen everything from Lin Yue found herself powerless in the face of justice. Her plans, so long nurtured in secret, unraveled with exquisite precision. The cruelty of the punishment was undeniable. Lin Yue felt it echo in her bones even as a spirit. Her heart twisted with conflicting emotions: satisfaction, sorrow, and the strange, hollow ache of absence. She wanted to scream, to leap into the fray and make herself seen, but the laws of her current existence forbade it. She could only watch. Each moment, each gasp of terror from her enemies, was a bomb and a dagger all at once. And then, amidst the chaos, she saw him. Prince Jian, standing over the scene of his retribution, his face a mixture of triumph and pain. His eyes, when they met hers even across the barrier between life and death, were soft, filled with understanding and unspoken sorrow. In that instant, Lin Yue realized something profound: her death had not been meaningless. Her actions, her sacrifice, had set forces in motion that would correct the injustices of her life, even without her hand guiding them. Time in the spirit world was different, fluid. Lin Yue drifted above her own funeral, noting the mourners, the incense smoke curling in delicate spirals above her coffin. She lingered on the faces of those who wept sincerely, the servants who had been loyal, the friends she had once protected. Their grief was genuine, raw, and it reminded her of the life she had lost. Yet even as sorrow washed over her, there was clarity. The thread of fate that had been severed could now be rewoven. She could return, but only if she understood the mistakes that had led her here. As the final act of her first journey as a spirit, she witnessed the death of her family. It was not mindless violence, it was precise, cold, and calculated justice, as Prince Jian ensured that those responsible for her suffering faced the consequences of their greed and cruelty. Every scream, every tear, every plea for mercy resonated through her, and for the first time since death, Lin Yue felt a sense of closure, of the scales beginning to tip. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The last echoes of destruction faded, leaving a silence that was almost holy in its stillness. Lin Yue's ethereal form felt lighter, almost radiant, and a strange warmth settled over her. The anger that had defined her final moments in life softened, replaced by something new: understanding, clarity, and an unyielding resolve. The world shifted beneath her, colors blending, shapes melting into one another, and Lin Yue felt herself pulled backward, drawn through time. The haze cleared, and suddenly she was back. The courtyard of the Marquis's mansion, sun-drenched and vibrant, awaited her eyes as she returned to the day she had first come home after 3 years of recuperation. Her body, restored and alive, breathed once more, but this time, Lin Yue's mind carried the weight of foresight. She remembered every betrayal, every deceit, every act of cruelty, and now she held the advantage of knowledge, the ultimate weapon. She would not falter this time. She would not allow herself to be imprisoned, silenced, or erased. As she stood there, her fingers brushing against the cool stone of the mansion's gates, a single thought burned brighter than any fear: this life, which had once been stolen from her, was hers again. And this time, she would take nothing for granted. The first spark of vengeance ignited in her chest, but beneath it, there was something more: hope, strategy, and the quiet determination of a soul who had seen both the depth of human cruelty and the possibility of justice. Lin Yue inhaled deeply, feeling the wind ruffle her hair, carrying with it the scent of blooming jasmine from the gardens she had once walked as a child. She would return, yes, but she would return on her own terms. Every step would be calculated, every smile a weapon, and every ally chosen with care. Lien Rong, her mother, her brothers, they would soon learn what it meant to face someone who had been to the edge of death and returned, unbroken, unstoppable, and sharpened by every betrayal. And somewhere, in the distant echoes of the palace, Lin Yue knew Prince Jian's vow had not been forgotten. He had seen her death. He had promised vengeance. And now, she was back to ensure that promise was fulfilled, but with a mind far sharper and a heart far wiser than the one she had possessed before. Her eyes glinted with cold determination as she stepped forward, leaving behind the shadows of her past. The path of revenge, reclamation, and reinvention stretched out before her, and Lin Yue, reborn, relentless, and radiant, was ready to walk it. The morning sun fell gently across the Marquis's mansion as Lin Yue approached the familiar gates. The air was crisp, scented faintly with the lilacs that lined the courtyard, and yet it felt foreign to her. Everything seemed untouched by the horrors she had endured or by the knowledge of the life that awaited her once she returned. In this second chance, nothing could be taken for granted. Every glance, every gesture, every word would become a weapon in the battle to reclaim what was hers. Lin Yue's body had recovered, her limbs strong, her posture graceful, but it was her mind that had transformed. Where she had once been naive, trusting the illusions of familial love, she was now precise, calculating. She understood the true power dynamics at play and knew that brute confrontation would only endanger her again. Patience, subtlety, and careful strategy would be her allies. Her first step was not to confront her family. She did not yet wish to reveal herself, nor did she wish to spark the chaotic violence that had cost her life the first time. Instead, she sought the one person whose favor could make or break her return, the Empress Dowager. The palace gates loomed ahead, a barrier of stone and authority, but Lin Yue approached humbly, her steps measured. She had practiced her bowing, her phrasing, her tone of respect and gratitude. When the attendants noticed her approach, they hesitated. She was a noblewoman, yes, but her family's influence had dwindled, and she carried no official rank to grant her immediate access. She knelt, lowering her head as she spoke to the attendants, her voice soft but steady. "I come humbly to request an audience with the Empress Dowager. I seek nothing but a single string of her Buddhist prayer beads, to honor her wisdom and protection." The attendants exchanged wary glances. The Empress Dowager rarely granted favors, even to nobles, without careful scrutiny. Yet Lin Yue's sincerity was palpable, and the aura she carried, calm, deliberate, and quietly formidable, demanded attention. Eventually, one of the senior eunuchs nodded and guided her into the inner chambers. When Lin Yue knelt before the Empress Dowager, her heart pounded not with fear, but with a mix of reverence and the thrill of opportunity. The Empress Dowager, draped in flowing silks of jade and gold, looked down at her, eyes sharp and discerning. "You are Lin Yue?" the Empress Dowager asked, her tone curious but cautious. "I remember you. You were brave and foolish in your youth. And now you return. Why do you kneel before me, seeking so little?" Lin Yue bowed lower, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Your Majesty, I have returned from absence and illness. I seek not favor, wealth, or titles, but only a token of your blessing, a single string of prayer beads to remind me of your guidance. I wish to honor you, nothing more." The Empress Dowager's eyes softened, though suspicion lingered. She studied Lin Yue's face, noting the quiet intensity, the clarity of mind, and the subtle aura of someone who had survived tremendous hardship. At length, she spoke, her voice low and deliberate. "Very well. You shall have the beads. But remember this, Lin Yue, the favor of an Empress Dowager is not a shield, it is a responsibility. Wield it wisely." Lin Yue bowed, accepting the string of beads with trembling reverence. To an ordinary observer, it was a simple gift, but to her, it was a symbol of power, protection, and a foothold in the treacherous world she was about to re-enter. When she returned to the Marquis's mansion, Lin Yue's approach had changed. Gone was the pleading, desperate girl who had once demanded her birthright. She moved with quiet authority, her head held high, her demeanor unyielding. And though Lian Rong still occupied the luxurious courtyard, Lin Yue did not confront her immediately. Instead, she walked through the main gates with the presence of someone favored by the Empress Dowager herself. The guards, recognizing the beads tucked into her sleeve and the authority she now radiated, allowed her passage without question. Once inside, she observed her family with careful calculation. Madame Lin, still elegant and composed, studied Lin Yue with a mixture of suspicion and unease. Lian Rong, radiant and smug, barely noticed her at first until Lin Yue's calm, piercing gaze met hers across the courtyard. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Lian Rong's face, subtle but telling. Lin Yue did not speak immediately. Instead, she allowed herself to savor the small victory of presence. By merely walking through the gates and reclaiming her rightful place in the household, she had shifted the balance of power. Superficially, Lin Yue kept her courtyard, her luxury, and her status, but beneath it, Lin Yue had already begun to plant seeds of doubt and unease. Every step she took, every polite nod to family members, was a quiet assertion of dominance, a reminder that she was no longer the naive girl they could manipulate. Her strategy was deliberate. By allowing Lin Yue to keep appearances, she would lull her cousin into complacency, making her vulnerable to the more devastating moves that would come later. Lin Yue's mind raced with possibilities, the timing of her interventions, the subtle ways to undermine her mother's schemes, and the careful cultivation of allies within and outside the household. At night, as she rested in her room, Lin Yue held the string of prayer beads in her hand, rolling them between her fingers. Each bead was smooth, worn by centuries of devotion, and yet it radiated a quiet power. She closed her eyes, feeling the presence of the Empress Dowager, imagining the protection it offered. And as she breathed deeply, she made a vow to herself: she would reclaim everything that had been stolen from her, not with brute force, but with intelligence, patience, and precision. The first step was complete. She had returned, her position secure, and her enemies unaware of the storm she was preparing. Every glance from her mother, every smirk from Lin Yue, was fuel for the fire she would unleash. And though she had survived death itself once, Lin Yue knew the next phase would test her in ways that even her past life could not have predicted. The courtyard, once a place of confinement and humiliation, now felt like the chessboard upon which she would play. Every family member, every servant, every guest who crossed her path would become a piece in the game she was orchestrating. And in the center of it all, Lin Yue would stand not as a victim, not as the girl they had once dismissed, but as a force of calculated, relentless power. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Lin Yue climbed to the balcony overlooking the gardens. The wind tugged at her robes, carrying the scent of blooming jasmines and freshly turned soil. She imagined the future unfolding like a tapestry, each thread carefully chosen, each move meticulously planned. Revenge, reclamation, and justice were no longer abstract concepts, they were tangible, actionable, and entirely within her grasp. And yet, beneath the armor of strategy and resolve, there remained a small spark of emotion: fear. Fear that she could fail, fear that her enemies would discover her schemes, and fear that the price of vengeance might demand more than she was willing to pay. But Lin Yue embraced that fear. She knew it was the compass that would guide her through the treacherous waters ahead. With the beads clutched tightly in her hand, Lin Yue whispered a vow into the night air. This time, nothing will take what is mine. I will reclaim my life, my dignity, and my future. And those who have wronged me, they will learn the meaning of justice. The night deepened, carrying with it the promise of the battles to come. And in that quiet, resolute moment, Lin Yue stepped fully into her reborn life, ready to turn the tide of fate in her favor. The palace was alive with anticipation. Lanterns swayed in the gentle breeze, casting dancing shadows across the polished marble floors, and the scent of incense mingled with the rich aroma of roasted meats and delicately spiced tea. Lin Yue moved through the corridors with quiet confidence, her steps deliberate, her mind a whirlwind of strategy. She had returned to life, yes, but this time, she had foreknowledge, and that knowledge was a weapon sharper than any sword. A palace banquet had been announced in honor of the emperor's upcoming inspection of the eastern provinces. Nobles from every corner of the realm had arrived, their robes vibrant with silk and embroidery, their smiles polite but often laced with envy. Lin Yue knew that for some, the banquet would be an opportunity to demonstrate loyalty and skill, but for others, it was a stage for treachery. And she intended to expose every scheme before it could unfold. As she entered the grand hall, the Empress Dowager sat at the head of the table, her hands folded elegantly, her expression contemplative. Her presence commanded respect, and Lin Yue felt the familiar tingle of reassurance when she caught sight of the Empress Dowager's sharp gaze meeting hers. The string of prayer beads tucked discreetly into Lin Yue's sleeve seemed to hum with the subtle promise of protection and favor. The banquet began with the customary rituals: tea poured, toasts raised, and musicians playing lilting tunes on their gushings and flutes. Lin Yue's eyes swept over the room, noting the subtle glances and whispered exchanges that most would overlook. Her instincts, honed by her second chance at life, detected the faint signs of danger: a servant lingering too long near the incense burner, a pair of nobles exchanging coded gestures, and the faint scent of oil-soaked rags tucked behind a decorative screen. Her heart quickened. A fire one intended to disrupt the banquet, embarrass the royal family, and potentially harm the Empress Dowager was already in motion. Lin Yue's mind raced. She could intervene subtly, manipulate the situation so that no one suspected her, and ensure the threat was neutralized before anyone noticed. She rose quietly, gliding past the tables with a grace that drew no attention. Hands deft and silent, she removed the rags, extinguishing the faint sparks before they could ignite. At the same time, she whispered to a nearby servant, guiding them to subtly adjust the candles and incense. By the time the guests noticed, the danger had vanished without a trace. Lin Yue returned to her seat, her composure flawless, her pulse steady, and the Empress Dowager's eyes briefly flicked toward her with a glimmer of recognition and acknowledgement of her subtle heroism. It was not long before the other plot revealed itself. Lin Yue had noticed a subtle tension between several officials, particularly those who coveted influence over the emperor and the prince. A poisoned wine cup, intended for one of the high-ranking ministers, had been carefully prepared and left among the ceremonial drinks. Lin Yue's foresight, her awareness sharpened by her spectral experiences, allowed her to act before tragedy struck. She discreetly replaced the cup with one of her own, using a slight nod to indicate to a trusted eunuch that the cup had been neutralized. By the end of the banquet, the emperor and Prince Jian were both safe, unaware that their lives had been imperiled in ways no one else could perceive. Yet the Empress Dowager, perceptive and ever watchful, had seen enough to grasp the truth. Lin Yue's subtle interventions were not only protective, they were brilliant. She had anticipated schemes, neutralized threats, and maintained decorum and dignity throughout. Lin Yue, the Empress Dowager whispered later, as the banquet concluded and the guests began to disperse. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial, yet imbued with warmth. "You have a gift, child. I see it. You are no ordinary noblewoman, no ordinary daughter of the Marquis. Your intelligence, your foresight, they are rare indeed. And now, you have shown loyalty and courage, even when those around you would have faltered. I will speak of your actions to the Emperor and Prince Jian. Remember, though, this is only the beginning. True power comes from understanding, not brute force. Use what you have wisely." Lin Yue bowed respectfully, feeling a thrill of satisfaction, but also a careful restraint. Praise from the Empress Dowager was powerful, yes, but she could not afford to become complacent. Every action must be measured, every smile intentional. She had reclaimed a foothold, but the battlefield was far from over. Soon after, the Empress Dowager sent word to Lin Yue that Prince Jian wished to speak with her privately. He had observed her at the banquet, though from a distance, and while he had not fully understood the dangers she had averted, he was intrigued by her composure and grace. Lin Yue accepted the summons, knowing that forging an alliance with him would be critical for both protection and strategic influence. In the quiet of the prince's study, filled with polished wood and the faint scent of ink and parchment, Prince Jian regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Lin Yue," he began, his voice even but serious, "you have demonstrated remarkable composure tonight. You have foresight, courage, and perhaps more than anyone else, an understanding of the dangers that lurk in places others cannot see. Tell me, do you always act with such precision?" Lin Yue's lips curved slightly, a hint of a knowing smile. "I act with what I have learned, Your Highness. Experience, observation, and opportunity. One must see beyond what is visible, beyond the surface of things. The world rewards those who anticipate, not those who react." The prince studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing the truth of her words. Finally, he spoke, his tone shifting, softer now, imbued with respect. "And if I were to ask for your loyalty, your counsel, could I count on it?" Lin Yue hesitated briefly, weighing her options. Prince Jian was ambitious, yes, but his intentions toward justice and honor aligned with her own. "Your Highness," she said carefully, "I offer loyalty, but it is a loyalty earned through mutual respect and understanding. I seek neither blind obedience nor empty praise. What I offer is strategy, foresight, and counsel. When you require it, I will be there." He inclined his head slightly, a small gesture but one heavy with significance. "Then we have an understanding. Tonight, you have not only saved lives but also earned my trust. In the days to come, we will see how this trust serves us both." Lin Yue's heart fluttered, a mixture of satisfaction and subtle pride. Not for the first time since her rebirth, she recognized the delicate balance of power, how influence, alliances, and perception could be leveraged to reclaim what had been lost. She was no longer the girl confined to her family's whims. She had foresight, protection from the Empress Dowager, and a budding alliance with the prince who could be both shield and instrument of justice. Returning to her chambers, Lin Yue allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. The prayer beads glinted softly in the candlelight, a tangible reminder of the favor she had secured. She knew that Lin Rong and her mother would be watching, scheming, perhaps unaware that their plans had already begun to unravel. Her family, once so confident in their control over her life, were now mere pawns in a game they did not fully comprehend. The days following the banquet were spent in meticulous preparation. Lin Yue analyzed every detail she could remember from her previous life: the timing of meals, the placement of guards, the tendencies of servants and officials. She made subtle adjustments, ensuring that future plots against her would fail before they even began. Every smile she offered, every bow she made, carried the weight of strategy. Lin Rong remained ignorant of the quiet storm gathering around her, her arrogance blinding her to the truth. Lin Yue had returned not just to survive, but to dominate. Even in moments of quiet reflection, Lin Yue reminded herself of her purpose. She had been given a second chance at life, a life she would no longer surrender to manipulation, betrayal, or cruelty. The Empress Dowager's favor, Prince Jian's tentative trust, and her own foresight were all instruments she would wield with precision. She had seen the consequences of inaction, of naivety, and she would never allow herself to be powerless again. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the palace in a soft orange glow, Lin Yue had solidified her first real victories. She had protected the lives of those who mattered, earned the favor of the most powerful woman in the empire, and secured a cautious alliance with the prince. She had begun to reclaim the narrative of her life not with brute force, but with strategy, intelligence, and the subtle art of foresight. As she gazed out over the palace gardens, her reflection in the tranquil water below, Lin Yue allowed herself a faint smile. The path ahead was treacherous, yes, but she had learned to navigate the shadows. Every obstacle, every enemy, every plot would be countered with cunning and patience. And one day, the reckoning would come not only for her family but for all who had sought to destroy her. Lin Yue whispered into the cooling night, her voice firm and unwavering. "I will reclaim everything that is mine. And those who stand in my way will regret the day they underestimated me." The moon rose above the palace, silver and unwavering, as if bearing silent witness to the beginning of a new era, an era in which Lin Yue would not just survive, but thrive, her mind and spirit sharper than ever, her destiny firmly in her own hands. The air in the Marquis's mansion had changed since Lin Yue's return. It was subtle at first: a hesitation in the steps of the servants, a flicker of unease in Lin Rong's gaze, a pause in Madame Lin's otherwise meticulous control. But Lin Yue noticed everything. She had returned not only to reclaim her life but to dismantle the very structures of deceit and cruelty that had once threatened to destroy her. Her first move was deliberate and understated. The temple banquet was approaching, a prestigious event where the family would showcase their influence and piety. Lin Rong had been entrusted with arranging the meal, a lavish vegetarian feast designed to impress the emperor's envoys. But Lin Yue remembered too well that in her previous life, Lin Rong had used such occasions to manipulate fortune and create hazards for her own benefit, all while cloaking it in the guise of propriety. Lin Yue arrived at the temple days in advance, disguised under the simple robes of a novice attendant. She moved quietly among the kitchens, the storage rooms, and the ceremonial halls, memorizing the layout and the preparations. She noticed the subtle placement of flammable materials near the incense burners, the slight overfilling of oil lamps, and the careful positioning of silk drapery, details that, if left unchecked, could have led to a disastrous fire. On the day of the banquet, Lin Yue acted with precision. She rearranged the dangerous materials, discreetly dampened the overly flammable areas, and guided the temple attendants to safer placements under the guise of ensuring proper ceremonial conduct. By the time Lin Rong arrived, the preparations appeared flawless, yet the danger she had intended to use as leverage had been neutralized entirely. Lin Rong's proud smile faltered slightly as she noticed Lin Yue's serene presence among the preparations, though she could not identify the subtle manipulations that had safeguarded the event. The banquet proceeded without incident, and the guests praised the household for their impeccable preparation. Lin Yue's satisfaction was quiet but profound. She had not only prevented harm to the emperor's envoys and the Empress Dowager's reputation but also subtly demonstrated her own competence without drawing overt attention. To outsiders, it appeared that fortune had smiled upon the family. To Lin Yue, it was a first blow struck with invisible precision. Later, Madame Lin attempted to manipulate another aspect of her household's influence: the arranged marriage between Lin Yue and the lecherous young Master Zhu, a man of wealth but questionable morals. Madame Lin had intended this match to humiliate Lin Yue, forcing her into compliance and demonstrating the family's control. But Lin Yue had anticipated the move. She arranged to meet Madame Lin privately under the pretext of accepting her fate. When the conversation began, Madame Lin's voice was sweet but laced with condescension. It is time you understood your duty. Young Master Zhu is an advantageous match. You will attend the meeting with him and accept his hand graciously. It is for your own good. Lin Yu's expression was calm, her voice measured. Mother, I understand your wishes, but I must admit, I cannot see how this benefits anyone. I have given the matter thought, and I believe a different arrangement might serve the family's honor better. Madame Lin's eyebrows rose imperceptibly, suspicion flickering across her face. Lin Yue had baited her perfectly. Oh? And what arrangement would you suggest? I have arranged a meeting, Lin Yue said carefully, where the family's honor and dignity are preserved, but young Master Zhu is indisposed. I fear that allowing the meeting to proceed could result in scandal, and that is something neither of us can risk. She allowed her voice to carry just enough authority to suggest insider knowledge, though she revealed nothing of her true plan. The meeting with Zhu was carefully orchestrated. Lin Yue ensured that Lian Rong was present, enticed to observe the proceedings, yet completely unaware of the trap being laid. At the critical moment, Lin Yue guided Zhu into an embarrassing compromise in action that would ruin his reputation if spread, but she framed it as entirely orchestrated by Lian Rong's missteps. The cousin's shocked expression, frozen in disbelief, was the first clear sign of the unraveling to come. Madame Lin, watching from the shadows, could not hide her horror as she realized the plan had backfired. Lin Yu's calm, strategic demeanor left her mother no room to intervene without further compromising herself. Every attempt Madame Lin made to assert control was met with calculated foresight from Lin Yue, who anticipated each move and neutralized it without overt confrontation. Lian Rong, meanwhile, was trapped in her own hubris. Her attempts to manipulate the banquet, the temple feast, and the marriage scheme all faltered under Lin Yu's careful orchestration. The cousin's confidence began to waver, her previously untouchable aura cracking under pressure she could not fully comprehend. For the first time, Lian Rong glimpsed the danger she had underestimated, a quiet, unassuming figure whose intelligence and foresight rivaled her own. By the end of the day, the damage to the mother-daughter duo's influence was subtle but significant. Madame Lin's attempts to assert authority over Lin Yue were undermined at every turn, leaving her increasingly desperate and exposed. Lian Rong's aura of perfection had begun to tarnish, her reputation subtly questioned among palace officials and family allies alike. Lin Yue, however, remained composed. She never raised her voice, never made threats, and never revealed the full extent of her knowledge. Instead, she allowed her calm authority to do the work, her presence alone signaling to all who observed that she was no longer the powerless girl she had once been. Every smile she offered carried weight, every nod suggested favor, and every movement was deliberate. That night, as she returned to her chambers, Lin Yue reflected on the day's events. She held the string of prayer beads in her hand, a reminder of the Empress Dowager's favor and a symbol of her growing influence. Every victory, however small, was a step toward reclaiming her life and dismantling the web of deceit her family had spun. She had acted with precision, foresight, and subtlety, qualities that would continue to define her strategies in the battles to come. For Lin Yue, the unraveling of Madame Lin and Lian Rong was not merely about vengeance, it was about reclaiming agency, dignity, and the right to live without fear of manipulation or oppression. With each calculated move, she tightened her grip on the narrative of her life, ensuring that the next time her enemies attempted to strike, they would find themselves ensnared in a trap they could neither anticipate nor escape. And in the quiet moments before sleep, Lin Yue whispered into the night air, her voice soft but resolute, "I have returned not to beg, not to plead, and not to forgive. I have returned to reclaim what was taken from me and to show those who betrayed me that their power is no longer absolute. The first threads of their unraveling are already in my hands, and soon, the entire tapestry will belong to me." With that, she lay down, her mind alive with plans, contingencies, and possibilities. She had survived death, witnessed the fragility of life and loyalty, and returned stronger than ever. Madame Lin and Lian Rong were formidable opponents, yes, but Lin Yue was a force reshaped by fire, betrayal, and foresight. Their schemes, their pride, and their arrogance were no match for a mind that had glimpsed the end and returned to rewrite it. The stage was set. The players were in place. And Lin Yue, patient, brilliant, and unyielding, was ready to strike at the precise moment when their unraveling could be made complete. The air of the palace was thick with anticipation, as if the walls themselves sensed the quiet storm that Lin Yue had begun to stir. The banquet hosted by the eldest princess, a celebration of both wealth and influence, drew nobles from across the empire, each eager to secure favor or display their own cunning. Lin Yue moved among them with ease, her steps measured, her gaze sharp, absorbing every glance, whisper, and gesture. Every detail mattered: the position of a hand, the slightest twitch of an eye, the arrangement of a banquet table. Lian Rong had returned under her mother's guidance, determined to reclaim favor and demonstrate her grace and talent to the assembled elite. She carried herself with a careful elegance, her zither resting gracefully against her lap, the polished wood gleaming in the flickering light of lanterns. To the unsuspecting eye, she was poised and flawless, the perfect daughter, the perfect niece. But Lin Yue saw the cracks beneath the surface: the subtle tremor in her fingers, the tension in her shoulders, the fear that lingered just behind her carefully maintained mask. Lin Yue, by contrast, approached the hall with calm confidence. Her silk robes, simple yet elegant, hinted at refinement without ostentation. She carried herself like a woman who understood her own worth, whose intellect and foresight were armor more potent than the richest embroidery. Every step she took commanded attention, though none could immediately discern why. Her gaze swept the room, noting familiar faces: the princess's sons and daughters, officials with ambitions as dangerous as swords, and the attendants whose loyalty could be swayed with subtle incentives. The banquet began, and Lian Rong took her place at the zither, poised to play a piece that would impress the audience. But Lin Yue had anticipated sabotage. In her previous life, Lian Rong had carefully orchestrated minor embarrassments to assert dominance and humiliate her cousin. This time, however, Lin Yue had ensured that any attempt at manipulation would fail. As Lian Rong plucked the strings, one note faltered, the result of a slight, deliberate adjustment Lin Yue had made earlier. The nobles gasped. Lian Rong's confident smile faltered, and a whisper of doubt began to ripple through the crowd. Lin Yue, stepping lightly to the center of the hall, took a position that drew attention without seeming deliberate. The music faltered again, and she moved instinctively, her hand gliding across the zither strings. A single, masterful note, rich and resonant, silenced the room. The nobles turned, captivated by the unexpected skill and poise she displayed. At that moment, Prince Jian entered the hall, his presence commanding yet understated. He approached Lin Yue, not to overshadow her, but to complement her performance. Taking up a nearby instrument, he played with a practiced hand, his movements fluid and confident. Together, their music blended into a harmonious display, dazzling the crowd and making clear, without words, the unspoken alliance between them. The audience was entranced. Lian Rong, trapped in the humiliating contrast between her intended display and the effortless elegance of Lin Yue and the prince, could only force a polite smile, her composure cracking under the scrutiny of the room. Lin Yue's victory was quiet, yet decisive. She had reclaimed not only dignity but public perception, turning admiration toward herself and her allies while exposing Lian Rong's limitations. During the banquet, Lin Yue also encountered Pei Yu, the young son of the princess who had hosted the event. A bright, perceptive child, Pei Yu recognized Lin Yue immediately, recalling the masked rescuer who had saved him years ago. His wide eyes lit with awe as he approached her, offering a delicate bow. "Mistress Lin Yue," he whispered, reverence in his voice, "you saved me. I remember. I have longed to thank you." Lin Yue's heart stirred at the memory, a quiet warmth amidst the ongoing games of strategy and survival. She knelt slightly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Pei Yu, your memory serves you well. The world can be dangerous, but courage and intelligence can protect you. Remember that always." He bowed again, his admiration clear, but Lin Yue knew better than to become complacent. Alliances, even with those who owed her gratitude, required careful cultivation. The boy would grow into influence, and she would guide him, subtly, toward loyalty, not blind devotion, but respect earned through wisdom. Meanwhile, Lian Rong's mother, Madame Lin, seated in the shadows. Every slight, every subtle display of superiority from Lin Yue grated against her carefully maintained control. Her daughter, once untouchable, was faltering before an audience she had intended to impress. And worse, Lin Yue had allied herself publicly and subtly with the prince, the ultimate symbol of favor and power. Madame Lin's fury was tempered only by caution. Any hasty move could reveal her schemes, and Lin Yue's intelligence made her a dangerous adversary. The mother and daughter duo were caught in a tightening noose, their pride blinding them to the fact that Lin Yue's subtle maneuvers were dismantling their influence without a single overt confrontation. By the evening's end, the banquet was remembered not for its opulence, but for the unspoken message Lin Yue had delivered. She had displayed skill, intellect, and strategic grace, aligning herself with Prince Jian and subtly showcasing her superiority over her family. Lien Rong's attempts to shine had backfired, her image subtly tarnished, while Madame Lin's calculated control over her daughter and the household began to fray at the edges. As the crowd dispersed, Lin Yue and Prince Jian shared a private glance, a silent acknowledgement of mutual understanding. This alliance, forged through action rather than words, strengthened Lin Yue's position further, signaling to all observers that she was not merely a passive participant in palace intrigues, but a formidable force in her own right. Back in her chambers that night, Lin Yue reflected on the events. The day had been a delicate dance of perception, alliances, and subtle sabotage. She had protected the innocent, thwarted her enemies, and publicly reinforced her standing, all without revealing the full extent of her foresight or power. She clasped her string of prayer beads, a small but constant reminder of the Empress Dowager's favor and the protection it symbolized. Her mind raced with future possibilities: how to further undermine Lien Rong, how to cultivate loyalty among the palace staff and nobility, and how to solidify her alliance with Prince Jian without arousing suspicion from those who would oppose her. And yet, amidst the calculated strategies and careful maneuvers, Lin Yue allowed herself a rare, quiet thought: hope. The recognition from Pei Yu, the alliance with the prince, the subtle victories against her mother and cousin, they were proof that the world could be shaped, that destiny could be rewritten with intelligence, courage, and patience. Her second life had given her not just a chance at survival, but a chance to command, to influence, and to reshape the world around her. She had returned stronger, wiser, and more perceptive than ever. And with every subtle victory, she felt herself reclaiming not only her life, but her rightful place in the world. The night deepened, and Lin Yue sat by the window, gazing at the moonlight reflecting on the palace gardens. Every star above seemed to whisper possibilities, every shadow hinted at future moves. She was patient, calculating, and relentless. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the unraveling of her enemies was only just beginning. The path ahead would be treacherous, filled with hidden dangers, rival ambitions, and unforeseen betrayals. But Lin Yue was ready. Her allies were chosen, her strategies laid, and her mind sharper than ever. Lien Rong and Madame Lin might have once held the upper hand, but the tides of power were shifting, and soon, the full weight of Lin Yue's intellect, foresight, and determination would leave them exposed, powerless, and undone. And in that quiet moment, Lin Yue made a vow that resonated through her very being: no betrayal, no scheme, no act of cruelty would ever again claim her life or her dignity. She had returned to win, and she would do so with patience, intelligence, and relentless precision. The game had only just begun, and she intended to emerge victorious. The imperial court was buzzing with whispers the morning the emperor's decree arrived. Lin Yue stood quietly in the corner of the hall, her robes flowing like liquid silk as her eyes followed the officials as they read aloud the emperor's words. Every syllable of the decree carried the weight of authority. Lin Yue was now formally recognized as the emperor's future ally, her name publicly associated with Prince Jian. Her status, once precarious, had been elevated in a single stroke. The effect on her family was immediate. Madame Lin's lips trembled, her carefully composed facade cracking as the words sank in. Lien Rong's eyes widened in disbelief, a flush of panic creeping across her pale face. Even the most distant courtiers whispered about the boldness of this young noblewoman who had risen so quickly, from a position of subservience and humiliation to a prominence that threatened to overshadow every family member. Lin Yue's lips curved into a subtle, controlled smile. This was only the beginning. Power was nothing if unacknowledged. The decree ensured that the entire court, from the highest ministers to the lowliest attendants, would now perceive her as a figure of consequence. Every action from this moment onward would carry authority and weight. But Madame Lin was not the type to accept such a loss gracefully. That night, she gathered Lien Rong in the quiet of their private chambers, her voice low and sharp. "This is unacceptable," she hissed. "The emperor has made a public declaration, and yet she dares to defy us, to rise above her station. We will not be humiliated by her insolence. Lien Rong, it is your duty to reclaim what is yours." Lien Rong's face, usually composed and radiant, flickered with fear and uncertainty. "Mother, but she is protected by the Empress Dowager. And Prince Jian, he is loyal to her. How can we?" Madame Lin slammed a hand against the table, making the crystal goblets tremble. "Do not question me. You will follow my plan. We leave for the ancestral graves tomorrow. That is where we will strike. She will be vulnerable, unaware that danger lies in wait." Lin Yue, however, had anticipated this very move. From her chambers, she observed the preparations for the family's trip, noting the unusual arrangements for guards and provisions. Something about the hurried, whispered instructions betrayed a hidden plan. Her mind raced, recalling her memories from her past life, the patterns of Madame Lin's schemes, the tendency to strike when Lin Yue least expected it. She acted swiftly, quietly contacting trusted palace guards who had proven their loyalty and subtly arranging countermeasures. Every route the family might take, every secluded grove near the ancestral graves, every concealed weapon or ambush point, Lin Yue had accounted for it all. She would not allow herself to be ensnared again. The next morning, the family departed for the ancestral graves, Lin Rong's radiant confidence masking her underlying tension. Lin Yue followed at a careful distance, her presence unnoticed but her influence extending like a shadow over every step. She noted the hired bandits, hidden among the trees, their knives glinting as they prepared to ambush her. The plan was clear: capture, humiliate, and perhaps even kill Lin Yue to clear the path for Madame Lin and Lin Rong's continued ascent. But Lin Yue was ready. She allowed the bandits to make the first move, their surprise evident as she met them with calm precision. Using misdirection and strategy, she lured them into a trap of her own devising. A fallen tree, a cleverly arranged pile of stones, and her own deft movements rendered the bandits powerless before they could reach her. And in the chaos, Lin Rong, ever arrogant and unaware, stepped directly into the trap Lin Yue had set. By the time Madame Lin realized the error, it was too late. Lin Rong was caught, struggling helplessly, her face pale with fear and humiliation. Lin Yue approached, calm and commanding, her gaze steady. "Mother," she said, her voice carrying over the sounds of the scuffle, "your plan has failed. Once again, your attempts to manipulate and destroy me have turned against you." Madame Lin's face twisted with fury and disbelief. "This is impossible." How did you anticipate?" Lin Yue cut her off, her tone icy but measured. "I have lived this moment before. I know the patterns, the schemes, and the consequences. Your greed, your arrogance, they blind you to the simplest truths. The path you thought would lead to victory has led only to ruin." The humiliation was complete. Lin Rong, trapped and powerless, could do nothing to defend herself. Madame Lin, confronted with the undeniable evidence of her daughter's failure and Lin Yue's superior foresight, found herself paralyzed. Her control over her family, her household, and her daughter had crumbled before her eyes. In the ensuing chaos, the family's other weaknesses were exposed. Lin Yue's elder brother, who had once tormented her relentlessly, attempted to intervene and rescue Lin Rong. But in the confusion, a hidden truth was revealed: he was not truly the legitimate son of the Marquis, a secret that Lin Yue had uncovered and now used to undermine him completely. Mortified and powerless, he succumbed to the weight of his exposure and was killed in the fray, a casualty of both his own hubris and Lin Yue's meticulous planning. Madame Lin, grief-stricken and enraged, attempted one final act of blame. "It is all your fault, Lin Yue. My son, my daughter, this is because of you." Lin Yue's gaze was unwavering. "No, mother. This is the consequence of your own choices. Every scheme you hatched, every plan you executed, led you here. I did not force your hand, you did. And now, you must face the results." Lady Lin's fury gave way to despair as the truth became undeniable. Lin Rong, once untouchable and arrogant, had been reduced to a state of helplessness, while Madame Lin's authority, influence, and credibility had been shattered. The mother-daughter duo, who had long wielded fear and manipulation as their weapons, were now powerless before the calm, precise, and unyielding force that was Lin Yue. As Lin Yue stood among the ruins of their failed schemes, she felt a quiet sense of triumph but also a deep awareness of the stakes ahead. The palace and her enemies were not yet fully subdued, and each victory carried with it the need for vigilance. Power, once seized, could slip through careless fingers in an instant. Yet for the first time since her rebirth, Lin Yue allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had survived, outmaneuvered her mother and cousin, and demonstrated decisively that she was no longer a pawn in anyone else's game. Every step she had taken, the prayer beads, the alliances, the careful observation and foresight had culminated in this moment of undeniable victory. As the family returned to the mansion, subdued and humiliated, Lin Yue followed with measured grace. She had dismantled their immediate threat, but she knew that influence was a river that never ran still. Madame Lin and Lin Rong, though diminished, remained players in the ongoing game. Every future move would require the same precision, the same patience, and the same cunning that had allowed her to survive and thrive thus far. In the quiet of her chambers, Lin Yue knelt with the prayer beads in her hand, rolling them slowly through her fingers. She breathed deeply, allowing the tension of the day to flow from her. The Empress Dowager's favor, her alliance with Prince Jian, and her own foresight had combined to ensure her victory, but she knew the true battle was only beginning. She whispered into the darkness, a vow both solemn and resolute: "I have reclaimed what was mine today, but I will not stop. Every plot, every scheme, every betrayal will be met with justice. I will rise above all who seek to harm me, and I will ensure that the future belongs to me alone." The moon rose above the palace, silver and silent, casting a light on a world forever changed. Lin Yue, calm and unyielding, stood ready for the challenges ahead. Madame Lin and Lian Rong had been dealt a decisive blow, but the tides of power were far from settled. And in the depths of her heart, Lin Yue knew that the ultimate reckoning would come not with brute force, but with the precise, relentless cunning of a woman who had survived death itself and returned stronger than ever. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, yet beneath the beauty of the palace, a storm of treachery and ambition churned unseen. Lin Yue awoke in her chambers, the string of prayer beads in her hand glinting softly in the sunlight, and took a slow, steadying breath. Today was meant to be a culmination of her trials, a public affirmation of her victory over her enemies, but she knew better than to believe in peace, not with Lady Lin and Lian Rong still lurking in the shadows, fueled by rage and desperation. The palace corridors were alive with the hum of preparation. Servants hurried to arrange silk banners, oil lamps, and flower garlands, their movements precise yet tense. Nobles arrived from across the empire, their polished robes shimmering in the morning light, and yet, Lin Yue's trained eyes noticed the subtle exchanges, the nervous glances, the whispered conversations, and the concealed hands slipping coins or letters to unseen figures. Schemes were afoot, and she could feel them like a pulse beneath the ornate floor tiles. Lady Lin and Lian Rong had grown bolder, emboldened by their desperation. The Empress Chen, whose obsession with Prince Jian had remained secret to most, had allied herself with the mother-daughter pair, plotting to displace Lin Yue and claim the throne's favor for Lian Rong. A monk, bribed and complicit, had been tasked with declaring Lin Yue an evil spirit should the Emperor or Prince Jian appear to falter in their support, a plan designed to destroy her at the very moment she was to be honored. Lin Yue sensed every threat, her mind racing with contingencies and countermeasures. She had anticipated much of this, but the weaving of three conspirators' ambitions into a single, coordinated plot was dangerous even for her. She would need every ounce of foresight, cunning, and patience she had cultivated. The ceremony began. Nobles lined the great hall, lanterns casting golden light on the intricate murals depicting the empire's glorious past. Lin Yue entered with quiet grace, her silk robes flowing like liquid night, every movement precise, every gesture deliberate. She held herself not as a frightened bride, but as a woman whose destiny was hers to command. Yet just as she approached the altar, a sudden commotion rippled through the crowd. Guards burst in, shouting that the Emperor and Prince Jian had been kidnapped, their absence sending a wave of panic through the hall. Chaos erupted. Courtiers screamed, some fleeing to corners of the hall, others attempting to restore order. And at that moment, the monk stepped forward, his voice loud and tremulous. "This bride is an evil spirit. To protect the royal family, she must be burned at the stake." Gasps echoed through the hall. Lin Yue's mind worked instantly, calculating every possibility. Her enemies had assumed that in the confusion, she would be powerless. They had underestimated the depth of her foresight and the extent to which she had prepared. She remained calm, her eyes scanning the room, noting the hidden exits, the loyal attendants, and the instruments of her counterattack. Then, as if summoned by fate itself, Prince Jian appeared, riding swiftly through the main doors with the imperial guard in tow. His armor glinted in the lantern light, his expression both commanding and relieved. He had anticipated the kidnapping, uncovered the scheme in advance, and returned to confront the conspirators directly. The monk froze, his hands trembling as the prince's presence filled the hall. The crowd fell silent, every noble holding their breath as the gravity of the situation became clear. Lin Yue, standing tall and composed, met Prince Jian's gaze. Their silent communication born of shared strategy and trust was enough to coordinate the next moves. With a swift motion, the prince exposed the plot. Lady Lin, Lian Rong, and Empress Chen had conspired to replace Lin Yue with Lian Rong and destroy her reputation. The monk, bribed and complicit, was publicly shamed as evidence of his treachery was presented. The courtiers, witnessing the revelation, murmured among themselves, their admiration shifting entirely toward Lin Yue's intelligence, composure, and the prince's decisive action. Lady Lin's face drained of color, rage and despair warring across her features. Lian Rong's elegant facade shattered entirely, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of someone whose carefully constructed life was crumbling before them. Empress Chen's expression flickered with shock and disbelief. Her ambition, once so carefully hidden, had now exposed her to public humiliation and eventual disgrace. Lin Yue stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant. Justice has been served. Those who conspire against the rightful order will face consequences. Today, the truth has been revealed, and the Empire has witnessed that treachery is never without punishment. The courtiers bowed and whispered in awe. Even those who had doubted Lin Yue's influence now recognized her brilliance, foresight, and moral authority. She had survived every threat, foiled every plot, and maintained her dignity throughout a rare combination that ensured loyalty and respect in equal measure. The wedding ceremony proceeded, now under the watchful eyes of both the court and the loyal palace guards. Lin Yue, walking alongside Prince Jian, radiated calm strength. Every glance exchanged between them reinforced their alliance, their unspoken understanding, and the bond forged through trials, danger, and shared strategy. As the vows were exchanged, Lin Yue felt a quiet satisfaction. Not only had she survived the most dangerous day of her life, but she had done so without sacrificing her dignity, her influence, or her principles. Her enemies were exposed, her status affirmed, and her alliance with Prince Jian secured both publicly and privately. After the ceremony, Lady Lin and Lian Rong were cast out from the Marquis's household in disgrace, their schemes thoroughly undone. Their influence, once vast within the family and court circles, had evaporated in the face of Lin Yue's foresight, strategy, and the unwavering support of both the Empress Dowager and Prince Jian. That night, as the celebrations continued throughout the palace, Lin Yue stood on a balcony overlooking the gardens. Lanterns floated on the ponds below, reflecting the moonlight in 1,000 shimmering points. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe freely, savoring the quiet triumph of the day. Yet even in victory, Lin Yue remained vigilant. Power was never static, and enemies always lurked in shadows. Today had been a test of foresight and composure, but tomorrow would bring new challenges. She allowed herself a small smile, a mixture of relief and anticipation. She had survived treachery, preserved her honor, and emerged stronger, more influential, and more respected than ever. The wedding day had been a battlefield, but Lin Yue had proven that her mind, her alliances, and her courage were sharper than any sword or threat. The Empire had witnessed her brilliance, and she had secured not only her own destiny but also the loyalty and admiration of those who could shape the future. As she gazed at the moonlit gardens, Lin Yue whispered softly, her voice both a vow and a promise, I have survived the storm today. Tomorrow, I will build the future. And every hand that seeks to harm me will find itself undone, for I have returned not just to live, but to command, to protect, and to triumph. The lanterns swayed gently in the night breeze, carrying with them the promise of a new era, an era in which Lin Yue's intelligence, courage, and foresight would not only secure her position but reshape the empire itself. And at that moment, she knew, with unwavering certainty, that nothing would ever again take what she had earned. The court had barely recovered from the chaos of the wedding day when a new storm threatened to engulf the palace. Lin Yue, now formally recognized as Prince Jian's future consort and a figure of influence in her own right, moved through the corridors with the same calm precision she had displayed during the conspiracy. But beneath the veneer of celebration, danger lingered. Empress Chen, humiliated and stripped of influence after the wedding plot was exposed, had not vanished quietly. Her jealousy and obsession with Prince Jian had metastasized into a bitter, cunning resolve. She sought revenge against Lin Yue, aiming not just to humiliate her but to destabilize the court itself. Her plan was subtle and insidious. A private dinner with the Empress Dowager was arranged under the pretext of reconciliation and palace diplomacy. But hidden within the lavish banquet was poison, designed to strike at the heart of the royal family. Lin Yue's sharp instincts, honed by her second life, immediately detected the danger. She observed the careful placement of utensils, the slight discoloration of one particular cup of wine, the barely perceptible glint of a toxin-laden dagger tucked beneath the table. She intercepted the plan with silent precision. A small signal to a trusted servant rerouted the poisoned cup, while Lin Yue herself replaced it with a safe one. The Empress Dowager, none the wiser, sipped the wine and smiled, oblivious to the near-fatal threat. But Lin Yue's mind was already racing ahead, planning the exposure of the true culprit. When the Empress Dowager later fell ill, the court erupted into panic. Rumors swirled, accusations flew, and the palace physicians scrambled to identify the cause. Lin Yue calmly intervened, summoning Zhou Ming, a brilliant physician whom she had befriended in her past life. Zhou Ming's skill and knowledge saved the Empress Dowager from the brink of death, and with Lin Yue's guidance, he uncovered the traces of poison that pointed unmistakably to Empress Chen. The revelation sent shockwaves through the palace. Empress Chen's face drained of color as the evidence mounted, each accusation backed by indisputable proof. Lin Yue, maintaining her composed demeanor, presented the evidence with clarity and authority. Every gesture, every word, reinforced her credibility and intelligence. Courtiers and ministers, once perhaps doubtful of her influence, now witnessed firsthand the depth of her foresight and the precision of her strategies. This, Lin Yue said quietly but firmly, is the consequence of treachery. The safety of the Empress Dowager, the stability of the court, and the honor of the empire have been threatened. Justice must be served, and those who conspire against the rightful order will face its full measure. Empress Chen, realizing the inevitability of her downfall, attempted feeble protests, claiming innocence and framing others. But the evidence was overwhelming, and even her most loyal supporters could not withstand the weight of the truth. She was deposed, her status stripped, and she was sent to the cold palace, a place of isolation and exile where her ambitions could no longer threaten the royal family. The court, once divided and tense, now shifted toward Lin Yue and Prince Jian. Their combined presence, intelligence, and decisiveness had not only safeguarded the Empress Dowager but also demonstrated an unmatched capacity to protect the empire from internal treachery. Nobles whispered among themselves, their admiration for Lin Yue growing as tales of her foresight and courage spread. In the weeks that followed, the emperor's health declined, leaving the throne vulnerable. Lin Yue, ever perceptive, knew that Prince Jian's ascension was not merely a matter of timing. It required careful planning, subtle alliances, and the support of the court. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring that loyal ministers were aligned, that potential rivals were neutralized or placated, and that the narrative of Prince Jian's rightful succession was uncontested. When the emperor finally passed, the transition of power was seamless. Prince Jian ascended the throne with the support of both the court and the Empress Dowager, his position unchallenged, his authority solidified. Lin Yue, standing at his side, was recognized not only as his consort but as a strategic partner whose insight had been instrumental in securing stability for the empire. The public announcement of her position as Empress consort brought mixed reactions: admiration, envy, and grudging respect, but none dared challenge it. Lin Yue had anticipated every possible objection, every whisper of dissent, and had acted preemptively to ensure her legitimacy and influence were beyond question. Yet even in triumph, Lin Yue remained vigilant. The palace was a living organism of shifting allegiances and hidden ambitions, and she knew that stability required constant attention. She spent hours with Prince Jian, discussing governance, alliances, and strategy. She advised the emperor, guided key decisions, and cultivated the loyalty of the court, her role evolving from mere consort to indispensable advisor. In private moments, Prince Jian expressed his admiration and gratitude, not merely for her intelligence but for her courage, foresight, and unwavering loyalty. Lin Yue, who had once viewed him as a strategic partner, began to see the depth of his own integrity, his capacity for honor, and his genuine affection. Their bond, forged in trials and strengthened by mutual respect, began to deepen into something more profound: a partnership of trust, intellect, and shared destiny. Lin Yue also took time to consider her enemies. Empress Chen's exile had removed one threat, but the remnants of Madame Lin's influence lingered, and Lian Rong, though diminished, still posed potential disruption. Lin Yue began to implement measures to secure the empire's stability, ensuring that her family's schemes could never again jeopardize the throne or her life. Every move, every decision, reflected the wisdom gained from her second chance at life, a chance she had seized fully and without hesitation. As night fell over the palace, Lin Yue stood on the balcony of the imperial chambers, gazing at the sprawling city below. Lanterns glimmered like stars, and the sounds of celebration and duty mingled in the air. She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection, recalling the journey that had brought her here: the betrayals, the plots, the near-death experiences, and the careful orchestration of every victory. She whispered softly, a vow to herself and the empire: I have survived death, reclaimed my life, and secured the throne for the one who deserves it. But this is only the beginning. I will protect this empire, guide its ruler, and ensure that justice and wisdom prevail. No treachery, no jealousy, no ambition will ever threaten the stability of this realm while I draw breath. Prince Jian approached quietly, his presence steady and reassuring. He placed a hand gently on hers, a silent affirmation of trust and shared purpose. Lin Yue, he said softly, you have done more than I could have imagined. The empire, the court, and I owe you everything. Lin Yue met his gaze, her own eyes calm but resolute. We have achieved this together, she replied. And together, we will continue to shape the future not for ourselves, but for the stability of the empire and the people who rely on us. The night air was cool and still, carrying with it the promise of a new era, an era forged by courage, intelligence, and unwavering foresight. Lin Yue, standing beside Prince Jian, knew that the empire's future was secure, that her enemies had been exposed and neutralized, and that her second life had brought her not only survival but the power to command, influence, and protect. For the first time since her rebirth, Lin Yue allowed herself a quiet smile. She had not only survived treachery and death, but she had also reshaped her destiny, ensured the rightful ascension of the emperor, and cemented her own position as a force to be reckoned with. The empire was hers to influence, the court hers to guide, and the future hers to shape. And in that moment, Lin Yue understood fully, the trials, the betrayals, and the dangers she had faced were not punishments, they were preparation. Every lesson had been a tool, every near failure a stepping stone, every enemy a test of her intellect and resolve. She had passed them all, and the empire, the throne, and her destiny were finally secure. The morning light spilled across the imperial palace, gilding the rooftops and illuminating the gardens in a soft, golden glow. To any outsider, it seemed like another ordinary day in the empire. Yet for Lin Yue, it was the culmination of years of careful strategy, survival, and relentless pursuit of justice. She had reclaimed everything taken from her, unmasked her enemies, and secured not just her own status, but the stability of the empire she now helped guide. The first order of the day was a matter of personal justice. Lin Yue had long contemplated the fate of her biological father, Marquis Lin, whose negligence and greed had enabled so much of the suffering she endured. Today, she summoned him to the imperial court. His eyes widened as he entered the throne room, the emperor's presence adding weight to the proceedings. Lin Yue, standing beside Prince Jian, spoke calmly, her voice carrying across the hall. "Father," she began, her tone deliberate but devoid of personal malice, "you were entrusted with honor, responsibility, and the protection of your family. You failed in all of these. The empire cannot tolerate such negligence, and neither can I. Your title as Marquis is hereby revoked. You will be demoted to a minor official, with duties limited to administrative tasks under supervision. Any attempts to interfere in the court or my household will be met with immediate consequences." The once proud man trembled, his face pale, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the power he had once wielded so carelessly. He attempted a feeble protest, but the eyes of the emperor, Prince Jian, and Lin Yue left no room for defiance. The humiliation was absolute, yet measured justice served without cruelty, a lesson for the entire court. Next came Madame Lin and Lian Rong, the mother and daughter whose schemes had haunted Lin Yue for so long. They had been cast out from the Marquis' household after their failures at the wedding and the ancestral graves, but Lin Yue knew that exile alone would not suffice. They had to face the consequences of their ambition, greed, and cruelty fully. She orchestrated a public demonstration of justice. Madame Lin, stripped of her influence, was left with nothing but her own guilt and despair. Lian Rong, whose arrogance had blinded her, faced the ultimate collapse of her social standing. She wandered the streets as a beggar, her once pristine gowns replaced by rags, her reputation shattered entirely. Every glance she received from onlookers reminded her of her fall from grace. Even so, Lin Yue did not act out of malice. Her vengeance was precise, targeted, and complete. She had survived betrayal, death, and manipulation, and now she ensured that the consequences of treachery were clear to all. Justice was served, and balance restored. The empire, however, was not only about punishment, it was about continuity, stability, and guidance. Lin Yue turned her attention to Prince Jian, who had stood unwaveringly by her side through every challenge. Their relationship, once a strategic alliance, had evolved through shared trials into a bond of respect, trust, and unspoken affection. Prince Jian approached her privately in the palace gardens. The scent of jasmine and the sound of water trickling in the ponds provided a rare moment of peace in the midst of courtly demands. "Lin Yue," he said softly, his hand brushing hers, "you have accomplished what I could not have imagined. Not only have you protected the empire, but you have also guided me through decisions I might have faltered on. I owe you more than words can express." Lin Yue's gaze met his, steady and unwavering, yet softened by the depth of emotion she allowed herself to feel. "Prince Jian, we have achieved this together. Your strength and judgment complemented mine at every turn. I could not have done it alone. And now that the empire is secure, perhaps we can consider what lies beyond strategy and duty." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. You mean, beyond strategy? Lin Yue nodded. Yes. Beyond contracts, alliances, and survival. Beyond revenge. I have done what I set out to do. My enemies are defeated, justice is restored, and the empire is safe. And yet, I realize that in you, I have found something more than a partner in strategy. I have found a companion, a protector, and, perhaps something like love. Prince Jian's expression softened, and he took her hands in his own. Lin Yue. I have felt the same. From the moment we aligned our fates, I have trusted you, admired you, and cared for you. You are not just my ally, you are the one I wish to stand beside for the rest of my life. Lin Yue allowed herself a rare, full smile, the weight of her past trials melting in the warmth of this truth. Their bond, forged through danger, strategy, and shared victories, had blossomed into a partnership built on trust, respect, and genuine affection. The formal ceremonies followed, solidifying Lin Yue's status as Empress alongside Prince Jian. She moved through the court with quiet authority, her presence commanding respect without arrogance. Nobles bowed, ministers consulted her counsel, and even former enemies recognized the depth of her influence. The empire, once a treacherous arena of deceit, had become a place where justice, wisdom, and foresight reigned, guided by Lin Yue and her husband. Yet even in triumph, Lin Yue remained vigilant. She knew that power was never static, and that vigilance was the key to sustaining both the empire's stability and her own safety. Her experiences had taught her that trust must be earned, foresight cultivated, and strategy employed at every turn. Still, for the first time since her rebirth, Lin Yue allowed herself a moment of peace. She had completed her vengeance, reclaimed her life, and secured her place at the pinnacle of power. She had survived betrayal, death, and treachery and emerged not only alive, but victorious, respected, and loved. That evening, as she stood beside Prince Jian in the imperial gardens, watching the lanterns reflect across the pond, Lin Yue spoke softly, a vow carried more for herself than for anyone else. We have endured everything. We have survived death, betrayal, and treachery. And now, we will rule not as master and subject, but as partners, as equals, and as companions. The future is ours to shape, and I will not falter again. Prince Jian turned to her, his expression tender, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Lin Yue, together, we will ensure the empire thrives. And together, we will find happiness, not just in strategy or duty, but in each other. Lin Yue's heart, once hardened by betrayal and survival, finally softened completely. She leaned into him, feeling the strength, trust, and warmth he offered. The journey that had begun with vengeance and survival had transformed into something far greater, a lifelong bond of respect, love, and partnership. As the night deepened and the palace rested beneath the silver glow of the moon, Lin Yue allowed herself a moment to reflect on the path that had brought her here. Death had once claimed her, betrayal had nearly ended her, and the world had seemed full of shadows and deceit. Yet through foresight, courage, and unwavering determination, she had turned every obstacle into opportunity, every enemy into a lesson, and every challenge into a triumph. She had returned not just to survive, but to reclaim, to rule, and to love. And as she stood beside Prince Jian, hand in hand, lanterns reflecting in their eyes, Lin Yue knew that this was only the beginning, not of revenge, but of a life fully and triumphantly lived. The empire was safe. Her enemies were vanquished. And for the first time, Lin Yue allowed herself to believe in a future filled with hope, love, and unshakable strength. The story that had begun in betrayal and death had ended in triumph, and the woman who had once been powerless now ruled not only an empire, but her own destiny, with intelligence, courage, and the unbreakable bond of true partnership.